You know that feeling when you're trying to grasp something really foundational about how a society is structured, like caste in India? It feels like this huge, complex, age-old system.
Oh, absolutely. It can be, well, pretty overwhelming to get your head around all the layers.
And for many years in independent India, a key piece for understanding this, like, comprehensive data on caste beyond SCs and STs, it's just been missing, hasn't it?
It largely has, yes. A deliberate absence in many ways.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're looking at a significant policy shift. The recent approval for caste enumeration in the upcoming national census in India.
It's just big.
For the first time since independence, basically, apart from the data already gathered on scheduled castes and tribes, the census is set to systematically ask people about their castes.
Which hasn't happened nationally in, what, over 70 years?
Exactly. So this isn't just some minor tweak. It's a decision with, deep historical roots and potentially massive implications down the line.
It really could signal a shift in how India understands itself, its social fabric.
So our mission today, if you like, is to unpack this. We want to understand, okay, why now? What could be the good outcomes? What are the risks?
What are people actually saying about it, the different perspectives?
Right. And ultimately, what might this actually mean for India's future? We'll be drawing on, expert takes, historical context, various analyses to give you a thorough but hopefully clear picture.
We've got some interesting sources today. Looking at historical census practices, expert opinions, reports on previous attempts, like the SECC, should give us a solid base.
Okay, so let's jump in. The big question first. Why a caste census now? What are the main arguments driving this?
Well, the core argument really boils down to needing solid scientific data, contemporary data.
Not stuff from decades ago.
Precisely. Those pushing for it say, look, to make informed decisions about reservations, about welfare, you need real numbers for all caste groups today, not just estimates.
Because currently, for most groups beyond SCs and STs, we're working with pretty old info, right? Or state-level bits and pieces.
That's it. Every census from 1951 right up to 2011 only systematically collected data on scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. Others were left out.
Deliberately.
Yes, that was the policy post-independence. The argument now is that a full count can generate this extensive data needed for much better policymaking.
So, like, identifying specific groups who are falling behind, even within broader categories, maybe.
Exactly. For designing and implementing more effective, targeted affirmative action programs, getting a more precise picture.
It's interesting, though, because India did count caste before, didn't it? During the British era.
It did. From, I think, 1871 right through to 1931, caste enumeration was standard practice in the census.
And then stop in 51. Why the change then?
The driving force then was the aspiration, the goal of building a unified, casteless Indian society. The thinking, perhaps naive in hindsight, was that not counting it might help it wither away.
A noble aim, certainly.
Very much so. But, as the decades passed, it became clear that not having the data wasn't making caste vanish. It was just making it harder to see and address the inequalities that persisted.
Which brings us to things like the SECC in 2011, the Socio-Economic Caste Census. What was that about?
Right. That was the last big attempt at getting national-level caste data. But it was different. For one, it wasn't mandatory like the main census. It was voluntary.
Ah, okay.
Yes, conducted under different legal backing. And maybe more importantly, even though they collected the data, the specific caste data, well, it was never officially released.
Why not?
The government cited issues with mistakes and inaccuracies. They reported something like 46 lakh. That's 4.6 million different caste names being recorded.
Wow, 4.6 million. That's staggering.
It is. It really highlights the sheer complexity, the administrative nightmare, potentially, of trying to categorize everyone accurately. Linguistic differences, subcastes, regional variations.
Yeah, you can see how that data might have been seen as unreliable for policy.
Absolutely. But even with the SECC's problems, that underlying need for data didn't just go away. We've seen states stepping in, right?
We have. Like Bihar, they did their own survey recently in 2023, found OBCs and extremely backward classes were over 63% of the population there.
Huge number.
Yeah. And Telangana, Karnataka, they've done similar things, explicitly to guide their own welfare schemes and state-level reservations.
And it wasn't just states. The National Commission for Backward Classes back in 2021 actually urged the central government to collect OBC data in the main census.
But the government initially said no.
They did. They stuck to the policy of only counting SEs and STs.
No?
So this recent approval, it really is a turnaround from that long-held position.
Okay, so we get the why. Now let's flip to the potential positives.
Right.
What are the arguments for doing this? What good could come out of it?
Well, a really big one is the potential for genuinely data-driven governance. For decades, policies for OBCs, for example, have relied on estimates like the Mandel Commission's 52% figure from 1980.
That's over 40 years old.
Exactly. Accurate, current census data could replace these old figures, which could lead to much better targeted welfare schemes.
So the idea is resources could flow more effectively to the communities who actually need them most now.
That's the hope, based on real numbers, not projections. It could also mean better representation, potentially, and allow for that regular revision of reservation lists. The Supreme Court actually mentioned that need in the Indrasani judgment back in '92.
Ah, interesting. So it aligns with past judicial thinking, too.
In a way, yes. And beyond just the headline numbers for broad categories like OBC, detailed data could help refine policies to make sure that within those big groups, the most overlooked, the most disadvantaged subcastes actually get addressed.
That sounds like a powerful way to tackle socioeconomic inequality more surgically.
It definitely has that potential. If you can clearly see the disparities in education, jobs, access to resources like the Bihar survey started to show, then governments can design focused interventions.
Promote a fairer distribution of resources, basically.
Yes. The core argument is this promotes social justice, inclusive development. By finally getting concrete data on groups who've been historically disadvantaged, but maybe weren't fully visible in the official data.
Making the invisible visible, as you said earlier.
Exactly. And some argue, that counting caste is the only way to actually monitor if its influence is reducing or if it's just hiding.
Right. You can't track progress if you don't measure the starting point.
Precisely. And then there's that political slogan that captures a lot of the sentiment. Jiski jitni sankibari, uski utni sederi.
Which translates roughly to
representation proportional to population share. It emphasizes social equality through fair representation in governance, in resources.
That's a powerful call.
It is. And beyond policy, some hope a nationwide census could spark a wider national conversation. A collective reflection on caste's role today may be pushed towards greater social justice efforts.
Okay, so there's definitely a strong case being made for the potential benefits, but of course there are concerns. What are the main downsides, the challenges people are raising?
Well, probably the biggest fear is that it could actually reinforce caste divisions. In a society already, let's be honest, grappling with caste politics and sometimes, sadly, violence.
The fear that it might deepen the divides instead of helping bridge them.
Exactly. That enumerating caste might fuel more political mobilization purely along caste lines, which some see as really detrimental to national unity.
Okay, that's a major social concern. What about practical issues?
Oof. The administrative and logistical challenges are immense. We touched on it with the SECC, counting India's incredibly complex web of castes, subcastes, regional names. It's a Herculean task.
That 4.6 million figure again.
Right. It's not just checking a box. You have language issues, migration, people identifying differently in different contexts, intercaste marriages. Getting accurate, consistent data is incredibly difficult.
A recipe for potential inaccuracies again.
It's a definite risk that needs careful handling in the methodology. Right. Then there's the political dimension of opposition. You might see pushback from some upper caste groups, perhaps fearing a loss of influence if reservation quotas get expanded based on new numbers showing larger OBC populations, for instance.
Makes sense.
And potentially, even within the OBC category, you could see resistance from more dominant OBC groups if there's talk of subcategorization.
Why is that?
Because subcategorization might mean redirecting some benefits specifically towards the smaller, more deprived castes within the OBC umbrella, potentially diluting the share for the currently more influential groups. So it could create new tensions.
Complex internal dynamics, too.
Very. And then there's an argument some people make looking at the economy. They question how useful simply counting backward classes is anymore.
How so?
The argument is that the state isn't the main employer it once was. With the private sector growing and other economic shifts, maybe just focusing on caste numbers for government jobs or quotas isn't the most effective way to tackle inequality today.
So questioning if the tool fits the current problem landscape?
Exactly. It's a point about whether this is the right lever to pull in the 21st century economy. Now, shifting gears slightly, let's talk about the different ways people are framing this whole debate. The underlying philosophies almost.
Right. Because it feels like there are some deeply held, almost opposing worldviews clashing here.
Definitely. One really strong viewpoint you hear is that not counting caste after independence. That was one of India's biggest mistakes.
A mistake. Why?
Because, the argument goes, it hindered the ambition of actually annihilating caste, like Dr. Ambedkar envisioned. You can't fight an enemy you refuse to even identify or measure properly.
So for them, this census is finally confronting reality.
Yes, a necessary step to actually tackle the problem. But then another perspective frames the census differently. It's not just about reservations or compensatory policies.
What else, then?
It's seen as a chance for a national self-assessment, a moment for collective reflection on how much caste still matters in Indian society, irrespective of immediate policy changes.
Like the nation holding up a mirror.
Kind of, yeah, taking stock. And connected to that is the argument that, look, social background and caste is key here. It still fundamentally shapes privilege and disadvantage in India. You can't deny it.
So ignoring it in the census is ignoring a core reality.
Exactly. Therefore, you need caste in the census to design policies based on actual evidence, not assumptions, if you're serious about tackling those deep inequalities.
We also heard there's debate about how to count, right? The methodology.
Yes, that's a crucial practical point. Should they use existing government lists, SC, ST, maybe the central OBC list, and ask people if they belong to one of those?
Like predefined boxes.
Sort of.
Yeah.
Or should it be a more open-ended question? Just ask, what is your caste? And record whatever the respondent says, then try to categorize it later.
Which sounds like the SECC approach that led to millions of entries.
It does carry that risk. So
Yeah.
each method has pros and cons for accuracy versus feasibility. And we already mentioned that point, questioning the purpose,
Yeah.
given the state's shrinking role as employer.
Right. It's also worth noting, isn't it, that the politics around this haven't always been simple party lines.
Not at all. Historically, both major parties, Congress and the BJP, have had internal debates and shifts in their positions on a caste census over the years. It's complex.
Okay, so as we pull these threads together towards the end, what's the main takeaway here? What's the core tension?
I think the core tension is that double-edged sword idea. On one side, the caste census holds this huge promise, providing the data to finally address deep inequalities, promote social justice effectively.
The positive potential we discussed?
Exactly. But on the other side, there's this very real risk, this fear that the act of counting could inadvertently harden caste identities, maybe even worsen social tensions and political divisions.
A delicate balance, then?
Extremely. And it's definitely, as we said, a major policy shift after decades of, well, hesitation at the national level.
And a lot still seems up in the air, right? The exact how the data is collected, categorized, used, that's not all clear yet.
Not fully clarified, no. And those details will be absolutely critical. The real impact is going to depend massively on how this is implemented on the ground.
But regardless of the fine print, everyone expects this to be significant.
Oh, absolutely. The expectation is this will heavily influence governance, electoral strategies, and just the broader battle against inequality in India for years to come.
And fun.
It feels like it could be a really pivotal moment.
A potential turning point in India's social and political story.
It certainly has that potential, but whether it turns towards more equitable outcomes or fuels division, that really hinges on meticulous planning, transparency, and crucially, a genuine commitment to use this data for inclusive development, not just political point scoring.
This has been, well, a really complex but incredibly important topic to unpack. Thanks for walking us through all those different angles.
My pleasure. It's a discussion that's definitely not over yet.
No doubt. And thank you, our listener, for joining us on this deep dive into the caste census in India, its history, its potential, its pitfalls. It's clear this isn't just about numbers, it's about identity, justice, and the future direction of society.
It really cuts to the core of many ongoing debates.
It does. So thinking about everything we've discussed, the historical context, the arguments for and against, what do you think? What might be the most significant impact, positive or negative, of this caste census in the coming years? And maybe what responsibility do we all have, citizens, policymakers, to try and ensure it leads towards fairness and equity?
Some important questions to mull over.
Definitely. We encourage you to reflect on this, maybe dig a bit deeper into those historical debates around caste and the census yourself. Thanks for tuning in.